Mr. President.
The senator from Nevada.
Mr. President, I start by asking unanimous consent that speakers on the Republican side be limited to 10 minutes each, with Senator Coburn controlling up to 25 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, come to speak on the two proposals, the Democrat proposal and the Republican proposal from the House, known as H.R. 1. I'm going to reluctantly support H.R. 1. It reduces government spending by about $61 billion below last year's levels. The reason I'm reluctantly supporting it is because I don't think it goes far enough. We've heard the other side rail that the cuts are too large. But let me just, a few quotes here. This is from Admiral Mike Mullen, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm just going to read the yellow portion here. He said that I believe that our debt is the greatest threat to our national security. Well, we know that our national debt is over $14 trillion now. This year, we're spending in excess of what we take in, over almost $1.6 trillion. And all we're talking about in that House bill that got sent over here is reducing that amount by $61 billion, a very paltry amount. A few other quotes that I want to talk about here. This is from Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner. He said, February 17th, it is an excessively high interest burden, talking about our debt. He said it's unsustainable. With the president's plan, even if Congress were to enact it, and even if Congress were to hold to it and reduce those deficits as a percentage of GDP over the next 5 years, and this is the important part, we would still be left with a very large interest burden and unsustainable obligations over time. That's the Secretary of Treasury. He also said that our deficits are too high. They are unsustainable. I think everybody agrees. They're unsustainable. And he said if left unaddressed, these deficits will hurt economic growth and make us weaker as a nation. Well, the bills that we have before us, one bill starts to address it. The other bill virtually ignores the deficit. Next quote, this from the president himself. He says, what my budget does is to put forward some tough choices, some significant spending cuts, so that by the middle of this decade, our annual spending will match our annual revenues. He said, we will not be adding more to the national debt. It is absolutely incredible that the president could make such a comment by looking at his budget. His budget takes us from $14 trillion in debt to $27 trillion in debt over the next decade. Almost doubles the national debt. And he says we're going to be living within our means. Here's a graph of that. Right? In 2010, we were about $13.5 trillion. You see, over the decade, we go up further, further, further. Down here, 2021, 26.3. This is virtually a doubling of our national debt. That's why when Timothy Geithner said it's unsustainable, our Secretary of the Treasury, appointed by President Obama, he says it's unsustainable. We all agree it's unsustainable. So when are we going to get spending under control? We have to quit spending money that we do not have because we're bankrupting the very future of America. I want to quote just a few of the senators from the other side of the aisle. Senator Joe Manchin said, the most powerful person in these negotiations, our president, has failed to lead on this debate or offer a serious proposal for spending cuts. He also said, the Democratic bill, the other alternative, utterly ignores our fiscal reality, that our nation is badly in debt and spending at absolutely unsustainable and out of control levels. We must turn our financial ship around, but the Senate proposal continues to sail forward as if there's no storm on the horizon. That's a quote from one of our Democratic colleagues here. from West Virginia. The bill that has been proposed by the Democrat majority fails to understand that there is a fiscal crisis in this country, and it is a problem of spending. Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri said, another Democrat, "I feel strongly that the cuts are not large enough," talking about this bill. Senator Mark Warner said, "At some point, we need to send some kind of a shockwave across the federal government that this time we really mean it." He was talking about spending cuts. He was talking about getting serious about deficit reduction. Well, Mr. President, the House bill doesn't do enough, but at least it's headed more in the right direction about getting spending under control. While I might not agree with every one of the spending cuts in it, the direction it is going is the right direction, what we need to do as a Congress. The bill that the majority has put before us is really showing a lack of understanding of how serious this deficit and this debt, how serious of an issue that this is for our country. Now, a few other things that I want to talk about. I want to put all of this deficit reduction that this is being called into some sort of context. This year, the Congressional Budget Office says that we're going to spend $1.5 trillion more than what we take in. That's what the deficit is this year. According to the president, it's over $1.6 trillion. Those are their estimates. The bottom line is we are spending about 40 cents more per dollar than what we take in. Now, these spending proposals that we have before us, this is how much the deficit is. The House bill will reduce that deficit by this tiny slice of the pie. The Democrat majority's bill will reduce it by this little tiny slice of the pie right here. So the House bill is a small slice, but at least it's a larger slice than what the Democrat majority has put out. The bottom line is this is pathetic, and this will do nothing to actually put us on a sustainable fiscal path where we can start living within our means and quit spending money that we do not have. The House bill itself is actually just a 4% reduction in the amount of money that we're borrowing. It's just a 4% reduction. If you think about it, this year, since we're borrowing 40 cents out of every dollar that we spend, to put that in terms that maybe a family would understand, it would be like a family making $60,000 a year, and yet it's going to spend $100,000. Well, any family in America would understand that that's unsustainable. You couldn't continue along that path. And if that same family was to decrease their spending habits by the same amount that the Democrats have proposed, out of that $100,000, they would reduce their spending habits by $168. That's all. That's how pathetic this spending reduction is by the other side. We have to get serious. Recently, Senator Coburn requested a General Accountability Office report that came back and said they identified over $100 billion in duplicative and wasteful spending programs. $100 billion per year in wasteful and duplicative spending programs. This GAO report underscores the great negligence of the federal government when it comes to managing hard-earned taxpayer dollars. Let me just give you a couple of facts from that report. It said that the government spends $18 billion on 47 different job training programs. And yet the president even requested another $400 million for a new program that will replicate proven strategies to develop even more job training programs. You know how many of these job training programs are measured for effectiveness out of the 47? 0 are measured for effectiveness. 0. And yet we're going to create more, instead of eliminating a lot of the programs and doing our proper oversight that this Congress should be doing. There are 80 programs providing transportation to disadvantaged persons in 8 different departments. The GAO found that $2 billion in costs for just 29 of these programs, but the extent of fragmentation in this area was unable to identify total cost for the other 51 programs. In other words, they couldn't even identify what the total costs were for these other programs. That's how messed up it is. The U.S. government also spends about $63 billion on 18 different domestic food and nutrition programs, and about $3 billion on 20 homelessness programs. And the report notes, and I'm quoting, "This can create unnecessary work for both providers and applicants and may result in the use of more administrative resources than needed." Let me translate that. That means we have too much bureaucracy and too much wasteful spending, so the money doesn't actually get to the people it's intended to help. It gets spent in the bureaucracy. We also have another almost $60 billion spent on over 100 duplicated and fragmented surface transportation programs, 100 of them. And so while I'm troubled that the $61 billion from the House just isn't enough to tackle the problem, I am astounded by what the other side of the aisle has done. It also continues many of the wasteful programs that we talk about. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting has come under fire. Obviously, NPR, this morning, their CEO resigned. We've seen the controversies there. But their bill also spends tens of millions of dollars to help unions organize overseas, not even in America. Are unions helping unions organize overseas? Is that what we want to be doing with American taxpayer dollars? Well, today's vote are a choice between modest progress and making the problem.
The senator has used 10 minutes.
I would ask for an additional 1 minute.
Without objection.
The House bill needs to be the floor for what we accomplish out of this process. And as I said, the House bill isn't nearly enough, and we can't allow this process to capture a modest improvement in the name of compromise by watering it down to a complete abdication of leadership. The stakes are really just too high. So today, I will be reluctantly supporting H.R. 1, the House bill, which cuts $61 billion from last year's spending. It's a step in the right direction, a modest step. The other side has put forward a proposal that should be rejected out of hand because it is completely inadequate. It keeps us spending money we do not have. Mr. President, I yield the floor.